The 2022 season is underway and it's going to be a great one. Already we have a new potential title fight between two drivers from the emerging generation and a race to remember in Bahrain. There's a lot to talk about, so here's my 5 things we learned from the Bahrain Grand Prix. Let's have a look. My name's Andy and this is Behind the Drive. Have the new regulations worked? The goal of the new regulations for this season has been to make following other cars easier. From the first race of the season, it looks like this has worked wonders for the racing this year. It was almost clear from the first lap as the drivers were so bunched up, which showed that not only are the teams much closer together in their performance, but they were also able to follow each other much easier, and as a result, the field spread was much better than we'd seen over the last few years in Formula 1. So the new regulations certainly seem to have done the job, and the fears of teams finding ways to make it much more difficult to follow each other have probably gone away. And as a result, we are seeing the differences between the drivers at different teams. In qualifying, for example, we saw Magnussen in P7 and Schumacher in P12. Bottas was P6 and Zhou was P15, and Albon was 14th to Latifi's 20th. Of course, we've seen this historically, but it will be something to watch as we go through the season, as teammate differences are perhaps going to be more pronounced. The race itself saw cars able to fight each other, showing that you didn't need much of a time differential to get overtakes done. We just have to look at the fight between Verstappen and Leclerc at the start of the second stint to see that the competition can continue over multiple laps, with Verstappen making a dive into turn 1 and then Leclerc getting the position back on the run up the hill into turn 4. The power of the DRS is clearly quite significant still, as the drivers can follow each other and make up the gap. But regardless, seeing multi-lap battles rather than just a few laps of cars trying to follow each other, followed by an overtake and then the new lead car dashing off into the distance, is something that we Formula 1 fans have been asking for years. And that is exactly what we have from these new regulations. Another change in 2022 has been that tyre temperatures in the tyre blankets have been reduced. And this has also made a big change to the teams from a strategy perspective, as the hard tyres for Lewis Hamilton looked like he was driving on ice, as he got no traction whatsoever until the tyres got up to temperature. This is going to be something that the teams will need to consider, as it will increase the power of the undercut, which is something that we saw throughout this race. On the whole though, these regulations have revitalised Formula 1. I expressed my concern towards the end of last year, but they have absolutely delivered, and so for me, it's Ross Brawn that's thoroughly deserving of a green box for designing these new regulations. Sure, there might need to be some tweaks, the power of DRS being one of those for example, but that's simply nitpicking, as we might well see great racing in the sport for many years to come. But before we take a look at the competition at the front of the grid, I want to take a moment to ask you to consider subscribing to Behind the Drive. I'm aiming for 50,000 subscribers by the summer break, so if you want to support the channel, make sure you subscribe for more content throughout the 2022 season. Red Bull versus Ferrari in 2022. In qualifying on Saturday, we had a first view of which teams have got these new regulations right and which have got it wrong. And it was an exciting qualifying session with 7 different teams represented in Q3. A great outcome which shows that certainly in the midfield, most teams have the opportunity to compete for points and get themselves into that final qualifying session. There are of course some teams that seem to have got these regulations very wrong. Notably, Aston Martin, Williams and McLaren struggled in the first qualifying and race of the season. But they aren't too far away from the rest of the pack, which is promising to see for the competition as a whole. But it's Red Bull and Ferrari that look to be the 2 front-running teams for 2022, and the fact that we don't have one team clear of the rest at the beginning of the new set of regulations is really exciting. And Red Bull and Ferrari were trading fastest laps throughout qualifying and locked out the front 2 rows of the grid at the end of it all. And this suggests that we have the first ever championship competition between 2 or 3 drivers from a new generation. Charles Leclerc and Max Verstappen locked out the front row. There was less than a tenth of a second between those 2 drivers in Q3, with Sainz then just 6 thousandths of a second behind in third. It suggests that we may well have a title fight between these 2 teams on our hands this year. In the race, it was close between them once again, with Leclerc and Verstappen leading the way and holding a good gap to the rest of the cars. Similarly, Perez and Sainz were running very close together as they were matching each other in the pit stops. If this theme continues this year, it could be very exciting indeed for both World Championships. The competition will be fierce, as we saw from the 3-lap battle we watched early on in the second stint between Verstappen and Leclerc. Neither of those drivers will give up easily, and especially with these regulations, they will have the opportunity to fight back straight away. And for the first round, it's Charles Leclerc who's taken the lead, and seemed to have done so relatively comfortably in the race as he was managing the pace well and seemed to find it easier to manage his tyres than the Red Bull of Max Verstappen. Through the safety car restart at the end, it looked like he was very comfortable at the front and was expertly managing the pace. And even without the terrible performance from Red Bull Powertrains, which we'll get onto later, towards the end, Leclerc would have been on top. In the end, we've seen Ferrari take an excellent 1-2 finish, and what a brilliant result it is for them, as they could well be in for a dominant year in Formula 1. For me, it's got to be a green box for this title fight, as we've seen Ferrari and Red Bull so closely matched already, subject to those Red Bull powertrain issues. The best thing for me is that the two teams have gone for such a different car design, particularly with the side pods. It shows that these regulations are not as prescriptive as people had feared, and there were many routes to create a quick car for this season. Mercedes firmly best of the rest. The Mercedes struggles were not sandbagging after all, as both Mercedes drivers struggled this weekend, and it's so strange to see the Mercedes drivers are way behind the Red Bull and Ferrari. It seems like their size zero side pod concept has caused a few challenges, with significant drag from the rear tyres as there are no side pods to redirect the airflow around them. There also seems to be some challenges with sealing the floor, as they've tried so many different setups and different floor designs in efforts to keep that Mercedes flat and level and reduce the porpoising problems that they've struggled with ever since the first winter test. The Sky pundits were saying that the Mercedes car had the potential in there, and perhaps it does, but it's going to undoubtedly take some time to develop the parts, and then there'll be the question over whether they'll have done enough to catch up to the Ferraris and the Red Bulls. Perhaps they will be able to, but for now, it will need to be damage limitation for the Mercedes team, and that's exactly what they managed to do in Bahrain. The drivers were able to hold 5th and 6th through the race, with Russell making up some spots after a poor qualifying result. And they did everything that they could, with early pit stops and differential strategies. Overall, it feels like they're in a bit of no man's land for now, well behind the front runners and ahead of the rest of the teams in the midfield pack. It's the kind of position where McLaren and Ferrari were last year, except they won't have that kind of competition for third in the championship. And on this occasion it worked perfectly, as they took advantage of the fact that the Red Bulls failed to finish ahead of them and ended up with a 3rd-4th finish, which is more than they could have possibly dreamed of following testing and qualifying on Saturday. But at the same time, let's face it, the Mercedes team got lucky this weekend, and it's unlikely to happen at each and every race, and they remain well behind Ferrari in particular. So for Mercedes, it's an amber box this week, as this is not what they would have wanted and nowhere near where they'd expect themselves to be. But boy, is it exciting knowing that they will have work to do, and if they pull it off, it could well mean that there are actually 3 teams in this fight. Or perhaps that's just me being optimistic. Either way, they seemingly have a reliable car, which might be all they need if they want to achieve more podium finishes. Haas above expectations. Haas have had a really tough year so far, but it's started to come good for the Haas team as Kevin Magnussen qualified P7 and Mick Schumacher qualified P12. It was a great start to their 2022 season, and it's a huge leap forward for the team as they were able to compete well within the points for the first time since 2018. Kevin Magnussen had an excellent start as he was running in P5, making up 2 places on Bottas and Perez from the off, and it was looking great until a lock-up into turn 1 meant he started to struggle, despite the fact that Magnussen started on a brand new set of tyres. So although the Haas car has been brilliant in qualifying, perhaps it's tough on its tyres, or at least it has been in Bahrain. He wasn't the only one, with most of the team seeming to find these cars to be tough on tyres throughout the race, but bringing the Danish driver back to the team has been awesome for 2022. And let's face it, we might not have seen the Haas car's true potential without him, as Mazepin wouldn't have been capable of putting in these kinds of performances based on what we saw from him last year. As for Mick Schumacher, he was unfortunate early on, as he was tagged by Esteban Ocon and spun round, but a lovely pirouette meant he was able to continue, but was fighting much further down the order than he perhaps otherwise would have been. Magnussen ran his race comfortably in 7th, and that's great to see from a team that struggled for so long. And of course, this did become 5th after the finish, after the Red Bulls retired. The Haas team will be celebrating as if it was a race win this evening, whilst also wanting to keep these performances up as we go through this season. The Haas car is in a very good place, but without development, they may well struggle to continue to compete for points as other teams make progress around them. So fingers crossed they're able to keep up these kinds of performances and maximise this opportunity to compete further up the order. So after everything they've gone through, it's Haas that have done an excellent job with these new regulations, and so it's got to be a green box for their awesome performance in the Bahrain race. Red Bull Powertrain problems. It was all drama at the end of the race, as there was a late safety car caused by an electronics issue for Pierre Gasly in the AlphaTauri. And then, after the restart, it ended in a failure for Max Verstappen and Sergio Perez in the Red Bulls, which happened so close together. It looked very disappointing for them, and disappointing for the team as a whole, in particular the new Red Bull Powertrains division, as they've taken over the Honda project with support from the Japanese manufacturer. So 3 of their 4 cars have failed to finish the race, and hopefully these issues don't continue throughout the rest of the year, but when you see power units failing like that so consecutively, you have to be concerned for the team's potential overall through the rest of this year. If they can't recover these power unit elements, it could well mean that they're forced into using more than their allowed parts, which could then result in grid drops later in the year. We shall have to wait and see on that one. It was a real shame for Verstappen after he drove a great race and thoroughly deserved second position for his performance, and alongside his power unit failure he also seemed to be struggling with a steering issue, which he was very vocal about on the radio. Sergio Perez was also deserving of 4th position and was controlling his race well, even potentially being close to Carlos Sainz in the battle for 3rd. On the whole, it is promising for Red Bull as they certainly have a quick car that both drivers can extract great performances from. But as so many people have said before, to finish first you have to finish, and these failures will be of significant concern for Red Bull. So it's got to be a red box for the Red Bull Powertrains team after such a disappointing result. And seeing reliability issues so early in the year does not bode well for the rest of the season. Honourable mentions. A couple of honourable mentions today, and I think the first has to go to Valtteri Bottas, the driver that managed to outqualify the driver who replaced him at Mercedes after he's gone to Alfa Romeo. It looks like a great move for him as he continued his consecutive Q3 run and put it 6th on the grid, lining up alongside his former teammate. A brilliant result, which he converted to 6th at the checkered flag following a tricky start and a great recovery drive. I also want to give Guan Yu Zhou an honourable mention, after he finished the first race of his career in 10th position, a very strong performance and points on his debut. A great outcome for him and a brilliant double points finish for Alfa Romeo. So the first race of the year is over, and it was a great one indeed. Let me know what I missed in the comments, and if you enjoyed this video, then make sure to leave it a like and subscribe if you want to see more from Behind the Drive this season.